Why is creating results through the work of other people so damn difficult? Half the time, the result you intended isn't even the result they deliver. Were they even paying attention when you went over this objective the fourth or fifth time? You run a pretty simple, straightforward business. This stuff isn't that hard. So how can they fumble the ball so badly so often? The simple, straightforward answer lies in a leadership principle known as variables and variance. Welcome to the Next Level Executive Podcast, a show dedicated to dentists who want to evolve from a clinician who owns a practice into an executive who leads a business. I'm your host, Perrin Desports. If you own a practice that generates over $1 million in revenue and you're wondering what's next, you're in the right place. Yours is a very simple, straightforward type of business. Let's not overcomplicate things here. Frankly, I find it beautiful in its simplicity, and I truly mean that. But we also need to acknowledge something else. All of you in this audience run very successful practices and groups. There's nothing average about any of you or your businesses. And while I'm definitely not saying that any of your success came easily, your success was primarily a result of your drive, your effort, and your ability to see the outcomes you wanted very clearly from the start. Put another way, many of you simply willed your way to success through your own power and might. Nothing wrong with that, until you try to recreate greater results through your people by using the same power and might approach. How's that working for you? Probably not failure, but also probably not the level of result that you wanted either, right? The reason is because your biggest asset that helped you create your success thus far works against you when it comes to leading the people you want to deliver those results for you in the future. So the title of today's podcast is The 4 Questions That Help Leaders Drive Results, which I'll get to in a few minutes. But those are the application, the answers to the test that you're struggling with. Those answers are derived from an important leadership principle known as variables and variance. Your problem is that your team isn't delivering on the initiatives, goals, or objectives that you so clearly laid out before them in your most recent address to the nation. You probably even went so far as to re-communicate it all in department and team meetings in an effort to drive the point home, right? You felt good about the words you said, and you received a few nodding heads of approval. So what the hell went wrong here? The answer lies in a combination of 2 things. 1, what you said wasn't what they heard. And 2, something went wrong along the way that they weren't prepared for or were able to deal with. I'm going to come right out and insult my audience. Huge career risk here. By telling each and every one of you that you do a poor job of communicating what the outcome looks like to you. This is the first part of the principle known as variance. What you said wasn't what they heard. Oh, I thought you meant, I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood you because I thought you meant. When it's crystal clear in your mind, you owe it to yourself to ask your team to describe in vivid detail what success looks like to them in terms of this particular goal. Their answer should have objective metrics as well as subjective results. Make them each Spend about 2 to 3 minutes clearly articulating what the outcome looks like to them as well as to each other. Folks, we're in the starting blocks here. We haven't even begun the work yet. If we're not clearly on the same page as what you have in your mind, then we're starting off going in incongruent directions. The second half of the principle is rooted in variables. Variables are the obstacles we encounter along the way, which could be unforeseen or even easily anticipated. Look, nothing goes according to plan, but contingency plans are known as that for a reason. Did you even have a discussion ahead of time about what might happen that could derail the process? Along the same lines, did you have a discussion ahead of time about what resources might be needed to pull off this objective? Time, money, new hires, third-party or outside expertise, etc. I said a few minutes ago that I find your model to be beautiful in its simplicity, but simple doesn't mean easy. That being said, what each of you are trying to do to grow or improve your business isn't so unique that it's never been done before. Yours is a business that is fundamentally about execution. Yeah, there are obstacles and variables that arise that were unanticipated, but much of what you encounter that creates failure or even marginal results is predictable. How much time did you spend with your team trying to predict it before they encountered it? The leadership principle of variables and variance comes down to the following. 1. Variance is minimized through confirmation and clarity by each team member related to what the leader laid out in their vision. Variance is minimized through confirmation and clarity. 2. Variables are the obstacles to be avoided and the resources to be procured by planning in advance for what could potentially derail the process or hinder the outcome. Variables are the obstacles to be avoided and the resources to be procured by planning in advance. If you can do a better job of leading with those aspects in mind, then your team will deliver the results you're looking for more often. I had to learn this principle the hard way, honestly, early on in my career with Patterson. It came crashing through my window in the very early days of my tenure in Richmond, like a whole lot of other stuff did for that matter. We had a very good and very experienced tech service department, but a lot of those guys like to take calls from, quote, their customers, end quote, and schedule them on the fly from their van while on the way to another call. They'd assure the customer that they'd be there sometime after lunch between 1 and 3 p.m. and never communicate it back to the service scheduler in the branch. I got blasted a few times by irate customers saying, "I've canceled patients in that room for over 2 hours and your tech hasn't even shown up yet. Do you know how much money that's costing me?" These were really fun phone calls to field, I assure you. I'd walk over to the service scheduler, and he'd have no record of the service call request or the appointment itself. And half the time, we discovered that we'd had another technician in the area that could have gotten there all but immediately. I'd confront the tech at fault, and his response would be, "I made it there by the end of the day and got him up and running." My response would be, "Yeah, you fixed the problem, but you failed when you set the expectation that you'd be there sooner." That's variance. Then I'd ask him, "Did you know that we had another tech in the area who could have handled the call more quickly?" The inevitable answer would be no, because the tech in question had never bothered to call the service scheduler in an attempt to coordinate any of it. That's variables. I had to coach variables and variance in every tech service department in every branch I ever ran, and usually multiple times during my tenure. I had to coach it between the sales department and the tech service department on equipment installations. I had to coach it between the sales department and the customer service departments on back orders and returns more often than I could ever count. If your business is growing and evolving, this is a principle you will have to coach into your teams endlessly. And you should embrace that due to its importance. One of my wishes in life, as crazy as this is going to sound, would be that each of you had spent 5 to 10 years doing something or several things completely different than in the world of dentistry. I'm not saying that I've seen it all, but I do count my experiences of having worked in a family business, 3 different operating businesses for a corporate America company, 2 slightly different startups, and now a solo venture as being highly accretive to my insights into people, leadership, and business operations. I wouldn't be nearly as accurate in my insights or as clear in my ability to communicate them if I hadn't had those experiences. The reason for this podcast is to instill in each of you those same building blocks to become a more effective executive in what you do every day. Judging from the ratings and the reviews you've left recently, I'd say I'm doing a halfway decent job of making some progress. To bang on that podcast drum once more, let me take you behind the podcast curtain for a minute and empathize with you. I say empathize because I probably have listened to a lot of the same podcasts that you have, some that are industry specific and some that are the top 10 global ranking and industry agnostic. They're all based on one of 2 possible approaches. Either the host interviews a guest, like an author or an industry expert, or the host has a solo show about a topic or a current event. The next time you're listening to your favorite podcast, if it's not this one, listen in both cases for a common approach. The show goes to great length to explain the what and occasionally dives into the why behind it, but hardly any of them explain the how to fix it. Have you ever noticed that? Think about it for a second. They talk a lot about what's happening or why it's happening, but little else. Want to know why? Because you can all relate to the what, and most of you are going to find the why to be very educational in your own development. After all, you're a very educated audience, and I think I am too. So why do so very few podcasts explain the how behind the solution to the what that they're talking about? Do they think you're just not bright enough to understand it? No. The answer lies in the fact that the how is the product, service, program, or course that they're selling. Let that sink in for a second. In prior episodes, I've gone to great lengths to share with you a lot of the details behind why I decided to relaunch this podcast. I think the new show format has been very well received from what I've heard from many of you. Again, sincere thanks and a few heart emojis for your praise. Here's another truth from me to you. When I decided to invest some time and dollars into the relaunch of the show, I actually forced myself to sit down and listen to a handful of industry comparison shows that already had huge followings. Now, to their credit, a lot of these shows have been around for a long time and they publish consistently. Mine is not a volume play. I really only drop 1 episode a week, and now it's about half the length of the prior version of the show. My reason in doing that was to make every second of your time investment count in hopes that the Next Level Executive podcast would be a show that you would look forward to and would take the time to sit and listen actively with pad and pen in hand, not passively while on the treadmill. And for me to fulfill that expectation, I was going to commit to delivering the how behind my insights and experience. The reason you all like this show is because you get something from it that you can usually apply the very next day. Yes, and I have an executive coaching program called the Next Level Executive. And yes, I would love to add another 10 to 15 people. If you're interested in learning more about it, I'd love to tell you about it, but this podcast isn't simply lead generation for the program. I truly want it to be thought leadership with a heavy dose of application, the how behind the what that you can apply on a weekly basis. I want you to learn what I've learned over 30 years as an executive, and I sincerely believe that you can get better at your leadership craft if you work hard at it and if you have someone to mentor and guide you along the way. I want this podcast to be the foundation of your leadership development. I couldn't say that on week 1 of the relaunch of the show, but 2 months in, I feel like I've learned and earned the right to say so now. I want this show to be different from all the others, and I work very hard to bring that to what you hear every week. Obviously, if you feel the same way and feel like I'm delivering on my objective to be a true thought leader for the industry in terms of actually teaching you how to lead a better business, then please help me get to that 55-star review rating on Apple or 25 5-star reviews on Spotify. Your rating helps get the show ranked and others who are searching for this kind of content. So if my thought leadership makes a difference for you, just know that your rating makes a huge difference for me. So if the what of the episode is your team's inability to deliver on your outcomes, and the why is found in the leadership principles of variables and variance, then let's get into the after action items section of the show. How to minimize the variance of outcomes and how to minimize unanticipated variables that lead to failure. If we were sitting in our boardroom for a leadership team meeting right now, I'd see all of your heads down and writing feverishly. Here's the moment you've all been waiting for when you clicked on this episode to learn the 4 questions that help leaders drive results. In order to corroborate that what I said is what you heard, and to confirm that the outcome I want is also what you in fact see, I'm going to ask each of my project team, what does success look like to you? Asking what does success look like to you is a way of getting someone to describe subjectively and objectively the culmination of the project, the end game. This is a very direct way of confirming vision alignment. You should do it for every member on your project team because you want to ensure that they are all on the same page as well. What does success look like to you? Every project has a sequence of events or a series of steps in the process. You want to get them thinking ahead and confirming with one another the interconnected points that are critical to the success of the project. To do so, I'm going to ask my team collectively, what are the key steps in the process or sequence that are most important? This should be a general discussion and a collaborative approach to problem solving. You'll also start to see each team member's perspective come through from a standpoint of their role as well as their years of experience. What are the key steps in the process or sequence that are most important? Now that we're on the same page with what the outcome should look like and the sequence required to get from beginning to end, we need to think in terms of possibilities, and probabilities. I want the team to brainstorm, what are some of the obstacles you think you'll encounter along the way? I say brainstorm for possibilities, but that could kind of be endless. So let's narrow down some of that to those obstacles that are more likely to occur, the ones that have the highest probability. Come up with 3 to 5 of them at a minimum. Posing the question, what are some of the obstacles you think you'll encounter along the way, gets the team to think ahead from a standpoint of adaptability. Furthermore, it gets them to act from a standpoint of ownership of the project so that they're not bringing every single problem or setback to you to solve. We all find it easier to think freely about solutions to problems when there's nothing on the line and the pressure's off. It's also confidence building when we encounter one of those obstacles, then we already have the solution ready to implement, just like we discussed in our initial meeting. Finally, you will have already thought through this one before you laid out the objective because you will have already made at least a mental commitment to allocate funding to it. But it's critically important to remember that most projects do not fail due to lack of funding. They fail for a variety of other reasons, many that we're discussing here, but one of the keys to realize is that many of the resources that might be required are well below your perspective. Put another way, your team may see what you do not. Asking the final question, what other resources do you need now or think you might need in the future, forces them to think ahead and start contingency planning well before it's required. Furthermore, they may come up with expense items or funding needs that you didn't anticipate that could change the entire budget of the objective. If you've ever wondered why so many projects come in behind time and over budget, then see questions number 3 and 4. So if you want to know how to improve your team's execution on the priorities that you lay out, then ask them the following. What does success look like to you? What are the key steps in the process or sequence that are most important? What are some of the obstacles you think you'll encounter along the way? And what other resources do you need now or think you might need in the future? The reason I'm confident in sharing more specifics related to how on my podcast where others won't, don't, or can't is because I'm confident that it'll spur a handful of you to wonder how much more depth there could be in the executive program. The short answer to that one is a lot more. And if you're looking to become a better leader or a more effective executive of the business you already own, then I'd love to tell you about what all we do in the program itself. I'll leave a link in the show notes to book an exploratory call if you'd like to talk further. I'll also acknowledge that owning a business is hard and leading a business is lonely, especially when we're scratching and clawing for even the smallest of results. When it comes to leading for results, there's one very obvious assumption that no one bothers to question. And it's an assumption that's worth a few points of growth and execution for every business in this audience. Once again, I learned about it early on in my career, and I've never looked at a year the same way since. If you're wondering what's next for you and your business, the answer's waiting for you on the Next Level Executive Podcast.
This podcast was edited by Resonate Recordings.